Everyone, thank you for coming. Tonight we're going to have a lecture and discussion after the lecture. I'm going to give you a few ideas about Nietzsche's view on truth. Tonight's lecture is called Nietzsche on the value of truth. I think it's going to be quite an interesting topic, and you will see why. It's something which is very familiar to every one of us. We use that concept truth all the time, most of the time unconsciously, but we always say things like, oh, it's true that John is my best friend. Or we say, it's true that God has created the universe. It's true that I'm here in this room talking to you. But then you have the other side. It says, no, God didn't create the universe. It's true that actually scientifically says it was created 13.8 billion years ago by Big Bang. So we constantly rely on truth, whatever we do. I hope I'm going to see you at 7 o'clock tonight. Yes, it's true. I'm going to be there. Maybe you come, maybe you don't. But that idea of truth, that concept is constantly hovering around our perception of reality. Now the question is why do we need truth? Where is that will for truth coming from? Where is the need for truth? Because if we say that something is true, and we were working very, very hard to prove that some happening in reality is true, that means that actually it wasn't true before we discovered it is true. So now the question is truth something which is existing and is awaiting for us to be discovered? Or maybe we create something that we call truth. So you can see it's quite dynamic, that idea of things being true or things being wrong, and that need for truth is actually constantly present in our lives. Now, there are many different types of truth. There is not only one absolute truth. There are many different truths. So I'm going to give you an idea tonight about, I'm going to split it in four. This is my arbitrary decision. 4 different truths. So one is, we're going to talk about metaphysical truth. Then we're going to talk about epistemic truth, scientific truth, and aesthetic truth. So you can see there are different truths in question. It's not only one. So for example, metaphysical truth. What is metaphysical truth? Metaphysical truth covers the existence of God. Does God exist? Maybe God doesn't exist? Metaphysical truth. The truth about the origin of the world. We have very different views about it. So it's nothing easy about deciding, do you want to be a religious person, believe in God and creationist theory, or you want to be a scientific mind and believe in scientific theory. Just to remind you that, again, it's a theory, right? Now, when it comes to epistemic truths, they are wrestling with the problem of how do we know that we know something? So how do I know that I'm looking at you and you are exactly what I see? Do I know who you are? Do I know what these objects are? Do I know what the world around me is? Or maybe I'm just making it up. So it seems, oh no, obviously it's true, you can see all these people, we're all real and all that. Yes, this is the perception. But do I really know who or every object is in itself? Or maybe I'm just using my experience. So when it comes to epistemic truth, for example, Plato taught there are 2 different worlds. World of forms, which he considered to be the real world, and the world of material world around us, which is the copy of the forms, or the real world. The real world is the topos noitos, is the world above, and all that we see, this is just the copies, individual specimens of different species. I already talk about tables, chairs, glasses, people, horses. All that we see are just copies of eternal forms. So you see, for example, Plato had the idea that the reality is not necessarily essential. There is something more essential to that. Then if you have Immanuel Kant, Kant talks about noumenon or phenomenon. Noumenon is thing in itself, and Kant says we cannot know that. It's impossible to know. Phenomenon is all that we know, because we know based on our experience of that particular object that we are looking at. So, as you can see, again, epistemic truth is not that easy to define, and it doesn't win the hearts of all people. Some people believe in material science, some people believe in philosophy, in religion. Again, where is the source of our knowledge? Look, how do we know that we really know things? So we see, again, another problem, another obstacle in definition of truth. Now the third one is moral truths. Moral truths are very important because they are all around us. They decide how we're going to live our lives, how do we relate to other people, how do we create our relationships, not just with others, but also with ourselves, which may be even more important. So moral truth, we believe in some way, in some behavior, in certain cultural inherited values, moral values, that we are taking it for truth, they're for granted. But we know also that those truths are very arbitrary historically in different societies, in different cultures, even in the same society. Historically, moral truths have changed over time. And what was moral 50, 100, 200 years ago is not moral anymore. And vice versa. What wasn't moral is now perfectly accepted, and it's true. Now there is another type of truths, which may be the most important for us tonight, and these are aesthetic truths. So when you say, it's true that I see this painting is beautiful, it's true, it's truly beautiful. I experience that feeling, aesthetic pleasure of the beautiful or sublime, and it's true, but they are very subjective truths. The aesthetic truths are not the same as material truths, as epistemic truths, or maybe metaphysical truths. These truths are very different. They're subjective. Now, for example, epistemic truths and metaphysical truths have in common, they're all conjoined to language. So language is extremely important when it comes to formulating the definition of truth. Now, when it comes to aesthetic truths, we don't need language. We react differently. So, now we are coming down to Nietzsche, and Nietzsche's view on truth. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche's first book, which is published in 1872, Nietzsche is actually contemplating about the only way to justify the world. And he's going against Schopenhauer's theory, which is based on a rational approach. Schopenhauer's moral, Schopenhauer's understanding of the world, which is based on a rational perception of the world. But it ends up in pessimism. Therefore, Nietzsche thinks that the world is in need of justification because it wasn't justified. With Schopenhauer's pessimism, which was extremely important and extremely powerful philosophy that hovered over Europe and Germany, especially in Nietzsche's day, Nietzsche wasn't satisfied. That pessimism doesn't justify life. So Nietzsche's project from the very beginning, from The Birth of Tragedy, his first book in 1872, all the way till his last writings, his project is continually life affirmation. So Nietzsche is interested in affirming life. In the beginning, he's interested in justifying life, because life wasn't justified. So what truth has to do with this? So Nietzsche is trying to prove that if you want to justify the world and existence, we have to look at the different means. We have to look aesthetically. So his credo in The Birth of Tragedy is that the world and existence, only as an aesthetic phenomenon, the world and existence can be eternally justified. So now we see is aesthetic phenomenon that matters for Nietzsche. He denies a rational way of justifying life, hence world and existence. So rationally we can't justify. Rationally we're going to end up in pessimism, in Buddhistic nihilism. Because if you take that life is ephemeral, we are all going to die, we're all going to get old, we're all going to get sick. I mean, there is no room for any optimism. So life is not justified while living there. Schopenhauer says the moral meaning of the world is that the life is not worth living. And he concludes with that. So the only way that we can deal with life is actually to repudiate desires. But repudiating desires, extinguishing desires, we are extinguishing life. And this is what Nietzsche is against. So it's very important to understand his main train of thought, which is constantly life affirmation and life justification. Also, before I continue, Nietzsche, that has to be said before everything else. Nietzsche is not an egalitarian philosopher. Nietzsche doesn't take care about everyone, about the masses of humanity. Nietzsche takes care about higher type. These are people, individuals. This is the type of people who are ready to sacrifice their lives, sacrifice their time, they put a lot of effort, and see in suffering not a reason to pull out from life, but actually the challenge which will propel them to life justification. It's obviously nothing easy about that, but I will stick to the question of language. So, language is for Nietzsche clearly misrepresentation of reality. So, one would say, wait a little bit, but we think our language. I can only think what I can say, only words that I know, they can develop with my thoughts. I can't think about anything else. So obviously language is necessary, the culture is necessary. When we are thrown into the world, according to Heidegger, when we are born, we end up in certain culture. We inherit the culture, we inherit the language. And hence we learn something about the world. We have words, concepts, sentences, and this is how we think. Because we can't think in different language. We don't know those words and concepts. So the language for Nietzsche from the very beginning is a very suspicious enterprise. Yes, it is and is necessary for us to communicate, but does language help us to understand reality? Nietzsche doesn't think so. So there is a paper that he published, actually he didn't publish, but he wrote in 1873 after the birth of tragedy. It's called The Truth and Lies in Non-Moral Sense. It's a very important paper. He didn't publish it, but then later on in the book Beyond Good and Evil, which came in 87, most of that paper appears in that book. So obviously it is very, very important. Now, why is it so important? Because Nietzsche directly talks about truth in that paper. So what he says about truth? He says, what is the truth? He says, a movable host of metaphors, metonymies, and anthropocentrisms are some of human reflections which have been poetically and rhetorically intensified, transferred and embellished, and which after long usage seem to people to be fixed, canonical, and binding. Truths are illusions, Nietzsche says, which we have forgotten are illusions. They are metaphors that have been worn out and have been drained of sensuous force. Coins which have lost their embossing and are now considered as metal and no longer as coins. So you see the definition of truth in the paper Truth and Lie in Non-Moral Sense. So he says truths are illusions. This is known as a literary figure known as oxymoron. How can you say truths are illusions? Or God is dead. How can God be dead? God cannot be dead. Yes, he can. In literary sense, we can say that in order to intensify the message, to provoke the curiosity, the thinking, the questions in everybody who listens to that. So truths are illusions, which we have forgotten are illusions, right? But then, just to explain a little bit more about language, because truth depends on language. Nietzsche says, what is a word? He says the word is a copy in sound of nerve stimulus. So we have a nerve stimulus first. We have a visual nerve stimulus, which is first metaphor of reality, And then we have copy of that stimulus, which is a word. So we have two metaphors, one after another. So you see the word, according to Nietzsche, doesn't say anything about the object we are talking about. We can describe the object, but we cannot explain the object. This is a massive difference which we in everyday's life don't really think about as much. So, and he says if language was right, there wouldn't be so many languages, because the same object is called in 200 languages all different way. So language is basically a word is very, very arbitrary. So this just gives us another hint about Nietzsche and truth. So if this is the question of language, then we have a problem with truth. That leads us to concepts. Now, concepts, what are concepts? We use them all the time. We say army, the nation, the country. What army? What nation? What is the nation? Nation is a concept. It doesn't exist. There are 60 million people, individuals living in this country. But nation, what is nation? And we use those concepts continually to build up our propositional truths, judgments, to say something about something. We use concepts. But we don't know really what concepts are. So for Nietzsche, concepts, the process of creating concepts is also denying the quality of objects, intrinsic qualities. So when we say, for example, leaf, we talk about concept, leaf. But we don't talk any particular leaf, which can be small, medium-sized, big, it can be thick, it can be thin, it can be green, it can be brown, it can be yellow. Which leaf are we talking about? So we are actually simplifying, we are reducing something which is full of content into something which is completely empty, is contentless. But it comes in our lives, in our thoughts, and even in some philosophies, that the concept becomes the real thing, and that the real things are actually bad copies of the concept. Just to remind you about Plato's philosophy of forms. So when Nietzsche talks about truth, as you can tell, he is not convinced at all that the language will help us understand what truth is. And we talk about truth all the time. We use language for that. So Nietzsche has shown that regarding the language, we cannot rely on language in order to reach to the depth. Now the next thing that I want to mention is actually the myth, and what truth and scientific thought do to the myth of mythology. Nietzsche says about myth the following: without myth, every culture loses the healthy natural power of its creativity. Only a horizon defined by myths complete and unifies a whole cultural movement. So myth gives us freedom to imagine. Myth gives us freedom to create, gives us freedom to be different. Myth is so important for Nietzsche. It gives a unity and strength, gives a content of the culture. Talking about myth, Nietzsche thinks before everything else about Greek mythology. And that polytheistic mythology, polytheistic religion is extremely important for Nietzsche, because contrary to the monotheistic religion, polytheism offers justification to the difference of characters. So, for example, you have 12 gods in Greek mythology, and they're all different. So if you are, for example, a soldier, officer in Greek army, Athenian army, for example, your god will most be Ares, god of war. So you identify with Ares. There is nothing wrong with you. You have your god, and you're trying to be like your god, because your mythology allows you that. You have the myth, you have the ideal, you're trying to be like that. All right? You're not subordinate to your god. God lives your life. And this is how the Olympic gods have been created. They live the life of people. It's very, very different than, for example, Christian God, which is omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, everything that man is not. So you have a big difference between polytheistic and monotheistic religions. The mythology that Nietzsche talks about is actually mythology, Greek mythology. Now, he wants to recreate Greek culture in the modern world, because according to Nietzsche, the modern world has lost its essence. It's lost the meaning of life. In modern world, rationalism that leads to pessimism overwhelms majority of people. Nietzsche wants that to be changed. Obviously, Wagner tried to do that. Hölderlin tried to do that. Romantics, German romantics tried to do the same thing, to bring myth back into life and bring mythology back, Greek mythology, back into the modern German society in end of 19th century. Because they saw in which direction German society, European nations are going. Nietzsche professed, the same as Dostoevsky, they professed that the disaster is going to happen in the next century. Because man has become contentless. Man hasn't got meaning of life anymore. He's completely lost in this rational, dry, pointless world in which reason is everything that he can cling onto. Dostoevsky, for example, writes in the Notes from the Underground, the man from the underground is the man who hasn't got anything to cling on. He's a civil servant, middle class, has no moral values, he has inherited some money, he has a comfortable life, but he's extremely unhappy because he doesn't have any meaning, doesn't have any moral values. And this is why he does what he does in the book. I advise you to read the book, it's a beautiful book. He tries to help somebody who is in sorrow and in problems, but when he promises a prostitute that didn't have any way of getting out of that life, that he is going to help her, and she finally comes to his place, hoping that she's going to get out of that underworld, he says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean it. I can't do it for you." So he hasn't got no moral values. There is nothing left to cling to onto. And this is what Dostoevsky saw the same as Nietzsche, almost at the same time. So what are we going to do about the absolute truth? Absolute truth. For example, religious. Nietzsche doesn't have anything against absolute truth. He doesn't deny it. But he wants that absolute truth, or, to be more accurate, absolute belief in truth, which religious people have, Christians for example, to remain among them. But he doesn't like that absolute dominance of that absolute belief in truth to rule the society. So yes, fine, you can believe in your God, you can have all these moral values that God has professed for you, but keep it among yourself. Don't bring everybody under that, because that is detrimental for, as I said in the beginning, higher man. And according to Nietzsche, is also detrimental to affirmation of life. And then he says, according to the absolute value and absolute truth, the ideas of the herd should rule in the herd, but not reach out beyond. He says, I do not refute ideals. I merely put gloves before them. So yes, this is how the world is. But let's allow other people to have also their values, and they allow other people to create their values. So we can also see maybe first liberal in Nietzsche. The many philosophy that sprouts out of Nietzsche's philosophy, they came later on. Heidegger came out of him, Freud obviously, Jung, Sartre came out, democracy came out, liberal society came out, feminism, everything came out of Nietzsche. Nazism, because it was so rich, so deep, so full of meaning, that every next wave of cultural change saw something progressive, something creative in his philosophy. So what about scientific truth? Why is Nietzsche so against that scientific truth? What is wrong about scientific truth? What is wrong about saying there are two glasses on this table in front of me? Nothing. This is how it is. Nietzsche doesn't deny that. But what Nietzsche denies is that absolute belief, again, in scientific truth, which has consumed the whole world, even in those days. Imagine now, we are 100% scientific now. But scientific truth kills mythology, drains that room for illusion, for imagination, for creation. Just look around and see what happened, for example, to art that has happened in the past and what is happening after that. Nietzsche also says that modern art is nothing but a copy of the old one. Modern philosophers doing nothing else but taking what the old philosophers, ancient philosophers had did, and not just replicating, building on it. But nothing is changing, and he sees that the rational dominance in this modern world is actually what kills that soil on which ideas, imagination, creativity can grow, especially in art and philosophy. And for Nietzsche, the great men are the men in philosophy, the men in art, and if they don't appear, if they don't re-emerge, the world will just be simply mechanicistic attempt to live more comfortable lives, to have better technology. And that's it. But what would we do if we didn't have all these geniuses before us? What is the art that we talk about? What philosophies would we read? Do we really need it? And that's a big question, existential question. Maybe we don't need that philosophy. Who needs philosophy? Nobody. Everybody. Zarathustra, book for everyone and no one. Nietzsche is a prophet. He saw the time coming. He saw that the world will turn into absolute consumer society. He was the predecessor of Frankfurt School. They debated heavily on that issue. It's a massive emergency for humanity. Just consumer society, nothing else. You need to work, get enough money to live a comfortable life, and that's it. Don't bother about anything else. Don't play piano, don't play a guitar, don't read philosophy, don't even think about composing something, writing something new. No, you don't have to do it. Why would I do it? I don't have to do it. Horkheimer and Adorno in 1930s start writing the book called Dialectics of Enlightenment, another book to read. And the special chapter there, which is very, very contemporary, is called the culture industry. And they argue that the culture that they lived in 1930s, imagine what we are about to say about it. That the culture is actually a pure instrument of capitalist society to contain people, to make them satisfied, to make them just buy and spend more money. In 1930, they saw it coming. Radio, for example. Without radio, Hitler wouldn't achieve what he achieved. Impossible. But radio is very similar to television and advertising. Why? Because it's one-way communication. The information comes out, bombards you with whatever they want to bombard you, but you have no way to reply because it's radio. You're only receiving. You can't send it out. Kettles said, regardless how big the lie is, you just need to repeat it enough, again and again and again, until the people start believing in it. Kettles came a little bit later after Adorno and Horkheimer started writing about that problem. So even if it's a lie, it doesn't matter. It's going to turn into truth. Because once you get that typical human quality of creativity out of man, the rest is easy. The rest is easy. The man will follow whatever you give, whatever you advertise. It will swallow that, it will buy. And I think we live in the perfect, this society we live right now, right here, is the perfect example. And I've been ringing these bells from as long as I am involved in philosophy. It's a perfect example that people don't need to read anymore. Why will you read? Everything is on internet. Just put few keywords and it's going to come out for you. Digest it already. You don't even have to chew, you don't have to digest, you don't have to absorb. Everything is going to be instantly injected into your veins and into your thoughts. So, just to recapitulate, the question of truth is very difficult, as you can see. I've just shown you tonight, I spoke about Nietzsche's way of understanding. What is important? What is important for Nietzsche is the value of that truth. What value truth has for us? He says the falseness of a judgment is not an objection for us. It doesn't even matter if it's right or it is not right. What matters is that judgment life-preserving, life-creating, life-enhancing? This is what matters. You call it truth, why not untruth? But it doesn't matter. Because throughout evolution, we have created so many different things which we can be proud of as human race. But now we know that lots of things were untrue as they developed throughout Egypt and Greece and Rome, etc., etc. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is what value that truth has for us. And the biggest problem, once again, for Nietzsche was that absolutizing of truth. He didn't like that. And I will finish with Ken James' quote. He says, the problem is, of course, that the Christian, the utilitarian, are not interested in the production of individuals that are interesting by Nietzsche's lights. If castration is the price one must pay to reach the world of blessed, our Christian will be happy to pay the price. Thank you.